So let's continue working on the featured posts now that we added the navigation and so on. The goal of the featured posts component is to output some posts which we, as the owner of the blog, marked as featured. Now, we will add posts and mark them as featured in a later step, but we can already start with outputting some dummy posts here for the moment. And therefore, in featured posts, I'll again create a basic component, featured posts, and you guessed it, we will export it like we always did. Now we have a featured posts module CSS file, and we will need it, so we'll import classes from that featured posts module CSS file already. And then here in that featured posts component, I again want to create another section which will receive a class of latest, because that's one of the classes I predefined in the CSS file. Then a heading for this section where I say featured posts. And then below that, a list of posts or a grid of posts. And for this, I'll actually create a separate component. Why? Because we will then use that same list or grid as it will actually be on the all posts page. On both the starting page in the featured posts component, as well as on the all posts page, I want to output posts in the same way. I want to render a grid of post cards, so of post items. I want to render those as a grid, and these items then should be clickable and take us to the individual post. The only difference is the number of posts and the actual posts that are being rendered. But the way they are presented will always be the same. Hence, we can create a reusable component for that, and that is what I will do. In the components folder, I'll create a new subfolder, which I'll name posts, which should hold all the post-specific components. And we could argue that featured posts is also a post-specific component, but it's even more specific to the homepage because we only use it there, which is why I keep it in the homepage folder. Now in that posts folder, I'll add a posts-grid component file though, which will then render this grid of posts. And now for that posts grid, you already find a posts grid module CSS file attached, which we will need in a second. So you can download that and add it in the posts grid JavaScript file. Now you also find attached a post item module CSS file, and you can download and add that as well, also in the posts folder, because we will also create a post item JS file next to that, which will hold a single post item. The post grid will render a couple of post items, and I'll split the grid and the actual items into separate components to keep every component lean and maintainable. Let's start working on the post grid component though. In that post grid file, I'll add a function, posts grid, which is my default component function, which as always is then just exported. Of course, by the way, you could create a snippet for this in Visual Studio Code to save some time. But here I'll just write it manually all the time. And then in the posts grid component, we want to return the JSX code. That should be output here. Now, the JSX code is again very simple here. It will be an unordered list of post items. Now, the data for those posts should be received from outside though. I do expect that I get props here, and in my props, I want to get a special posts prop. Now, of course, the prop name is up to you since it's your component. You just need to make sure that you then later use that prop name for passing data into this component. So then I want to output my posts dynamically here by mapping every post into a post item. And we have yet to add this component. But that's my goal here. I want to output a list of posts where I map my post data into post item components. That's the goal here. Now we will need to import post item for that, from the post item file we just added. And this file is empty right now, but we will work on that soon. And we'll also need some styling, so I will import classes from /postsgrid.module.css. And that is that PostGrid CSS file for this component, which has a class which should be added to the unordered list. There I want to add the grid class, which is defined in PostGrid. And there we use the CSS grid feature to render some grid columns. Okay, so that's that. Now let's work on the post item component, which outputs an individual item in that grid of posts.